On the north coast of Egypt lies Rosetta, where the Nile flows into the Mediterranean Sea at the end of its 7,000-kilometer-long journey, which starts in the heart of Africa. It was in this city that the key to the culture of the Pharaohs was discovered in 1799. The Rosetta Stone helped French Egyptologist Jean-François Champollion uncover the mystery of hieroglyphs. From then on, archaeologists could read ancient Egyptians like an open book, and they discovered that the Nile was far more than just a river. The Pharaoh's subjects worshipped it, celebrated it, and associated it with numerous deities. The Nile and its delta have been the country's greatest asset since the dawn of time. Without this life force, Egypt would be merely a vast and sterile expanse of desert. Upstream from the delta, the Nile is a majestic river. On its banks lies the current capital, Cairo, founded by the Arabs in the 7th century. Today, the river must wind its way as best as it can through this megalopolis of 16 million inhabitants. It is a sprawling city which stretches almost as far as the Giza pyramids. Today, these wonders of the ancient world lie 8 kilometers from the riverbank. But in the days of the Pharaohs, the Nile flowed right past them. That was how the millions of blocks of stone needed to build these colossal 4,500-year-old structures were transported. To gain a better understanding of the role and the importance of the Nile in Egypt's 4,000-year-old culture, we must go further upstream to the south, where it is the shape of a green snake winding its way through the hostile deserts. In Luxor, on the site of the ancient city of Thebes, the river has always governed the daily life of the locals. The river traffic is dense there. Egypt is a big country, and the Nile covers a distance of 1,200 kilometers. The river remains the natural link between north and south. You find all sorts of boats on it, from modest dinghies used by local residents to cruise ships transporting hundreds of tourists who have come here to visit the wonders of the ancient heritage sites, such as Luxor Temple, for example. There is one boat which causes a sensation every time it passes, and it has been doing so for 100 years. And that's the legendary paddle steamer, Sudan.
You are on board the oldest and most unique boat on the Nile. This boat was built in 1885 for the Egyptian royal family, for King Fuad and his son Farouk, who became the last king of Egypt. This was Agatha Christie's boat. In 1934, she and her husband were invited to spend a few days in Egypt. She began her stay in the old Winter Palace Hotel in Luxor. Then she boarded the paddle steamer Sudan and ended her trip in the old Cataract Hotel in Aswan. While she was on board, Agatha Christie wrote the first few chapters of her book, Death on the Nile.
Since the 19th century, the Western world has had a fascination for Egypt, to the extent that we talk about Egyptomania. And when Agatha Christie set her novel Death on the Nile amongst Egyptian antiquities, she knew its success was guaranteed. The 30-kilometer-long mountain chain opposite Luxor helped contribute to the craze for all things Egyptian. In it lies a site which captured everyone's imagination, the Theban necropolis. Archaeologists have uncovered over 600 tombs here, the most famous of which are those of Tutankhamun and Nefertiti, the wife of Ramesses II. But each year that passes brings a new set of discoveries. Omaima has explored every nook and cranny of these desert valleys. This was her childhood dream. She fulfilled it when she became an Egyptologist, specializing in the Theban necropolis.
We are in front of the tomb of Rekhmira, who was a vizier during the reign of Thutmose III. Viziers were a bit like modern-day prime ministers, so he was a very important man. Here, we have a whole wall decorated with scenes showing the Egyptian people bringing gifts to Rekhmira. You can see all sorts of things: herds of oxen, cows, calves, crates full of pigeons, piles of grain, jars of beer and wine. There are also trays of bread. These round loaves are typical of Egypt, and you still find them today. They are called shamsi, which means sun bread, because they are left out in the sun to rise. They are dense, wholemeal loaves. This shows us the riches that came from the Nile, from the silt of the Nile and from its floodwaters, from this green band of water, this green snake which is the lifeblood of Egypt. Without the Nile, Egypt would not exist and would never have existed. We wouldn't be here today.
96% of Egypt's population of 100 million still lives on the banks of the Nile. On both sides of the river lies fertile agricultural land. The water from the Nile has always been diverted, channeled, and harnessed for irrigation purposes. To water their crops, ancient Egyptians used a shadoof. This was a tool with a lever mechanism used to draw water from the river by hand. Shadoofs were still in use in the late 20th century. Today, they have been replaced by pumps, which are more practical but less environmentally friendly. Jibril, like his ancestors, helps himself to water from the river to water his cornfields.
Water is scarce here. The only source of water is the Nile. That's why we're lucky to live near the river. It depends on the season, but we need a lot of water for our crops. From here, right up to the sugarcane fields near the desert, everything is irrigated by the Nile. That's a distance of about 5 kilometers. The Nile is the lifeblood of Egypt, because we are a very agricultural nation. The river is what matters most to us. There is a famous saying that Egypt is a gift from the Nile, and it's true.
At Gurna, the town opposite Luxor, the benefits of the Nile are felt as far as the desert. Every plot of land is cultivated. Some are too small for a tractor. So, farmers like Mohammed use an ancient technique, the swing plough.
A plough is better than a tractor. The tires tamp down the soil too much. If a tractor were to drive over here, there would be lots of soil with nothing growing in it. It's better to use oxen. We inherited this technique from our ancestors. It's a technique which dates back to the time of the Pharaohs. The ancient Egyptians used a plough pulled by oxen. You can see images on some of the tombs around here.
The swing plough hasn't changed since antiquity. The ancient Egyptians did not use iron. The ploughshare was made of wood. Nowadays, it is made of metal. But the biggest difference between now and then is today's farmers own their land, whereas the whole of Egypt used to belong to the pharaoh.
This is our legacy, so we look after it. Before he died, my father said to me, "This plough will bring you luck." I asked him why. He replied, "If you have a small plot of land surrounded by fields, you can use the plough to work the land without disturbing your neighbors. Then they will pray for you, because you were careful with their crops." And he was right. That is important.
In the distance, behind the fields of corn and sugarcane, lies the Theban mountain with its necropolis. The inhabitants of Gurna rarely venture that far. Only a few of them have found work there, more often than not as tomb attendants. Yet not long ago, their village stood in that spot. Living in close proximity to the dead didn't seem to bother their ancestors.
In the 19th century, an archaeologist who came here found the owner of the house sleeping in a sarcophagus, in a coffin. Thousands of people lived in the village, and sadly, a few years ago, it was razed to the ground.
To preserve the site, in the 1950s, the authorities decided to destroy what people here call Old Gurna. Traces of the village can be seen all over the site, but it is in the tomb of Keraweth that you really get a feel for the intense activity that went on here, back when the living rubbed shoulders with the dead.
Keraweth was the steward of Tyre, the great royal wife of Amenhotep III and mother of the famous Akhenaten. This tomb is very beautiful, but it is not only tourists and archaeologists who think so. Come and see. This network of underground galleries is like a Swiss cheese. I'm not suggesting that mice have been here, but humans have, the inhabitants of Old Gurna, searching for buried treasure. Tomb robbers definitely used to live down here. You can see dark patches on the ceiling from the soot that built up here over the years. You can just imagine these men searching, making holes here and there, like this one, for example. Thanks to the robbers, we can pass from one tomb to the next throughout the whole of Old Gurna.